Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. Welcome. This is Osman Khan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for ITS Squared. And today we'll be talking about breaches. So how prepared are you for a breach and the key considerations and recommendations for readiness. So without further ado, the agenda. We'll start with definitions, what is a breach versus an incident, an alert and security event. We'll talk about the impacts of breaches, why it's important, why do we care, and also the size and scale of the problem. Then we'll look at the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, the DBIR, and look at the key findings. This is the report that was just released a few days ago, so it's hot off the press. And then we'll look at how we prepare for a breach. Again, it's not a question of if, but a case of when. And in fact, nowadays, we say you should assume that you're already being breached. So we'll look at the incident response maturity model, plan, lifecycle playbooks, the different stakeholders involved and team skills. And then we'll look at how you can get better acquainted with the enemy, know your enemy, and then therefore prepare for them. So we'll look at various models and frameworks that can assist you with regards to that. And finally, we'll conclude with a summary and some useful resources that you can use. So, a lot of times what you'll find is these definitions are conflated or confused by the audience. So it's always good to just level set the field. So when we talk about an event, we're talking about an observed change within the environment. So this could be, for example, an update in your firewall rule set or your IDS or rural ACLs as examples. An alert would be basically an event that has basically been alerted to your SOC team or any other team for that matter. So it's an event that's basically is captured and therefore alerted against a certain given threshold for action to be taken. Then you have an incident. So an incident is basically an event, but the difference here is that it's business impacting. So it's business impacting, whether, again, that doesn't necessarily need to be the wider business. It could just be a department or even a few individuals or a single individual. But the point is, it's an event that's business impacting and also impacts the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of a given asset or number of assets. And then finally, you've got breaches, right, in the middle of the concentric rings. And when we talk about breaches, a breach is basically an incident with a confirmed data disclosure. So this is where data has been stolen, whether it's personally identifiable information or personal health information, any such data or intellectual property for that matter that's been disclosed and stolen. That data security incident is basically known as a data breach. So effectively, in summary, events are observed changes in the environment, alerts are notifications of events, incidents are business impact events that impact CIA, and breaches are incidents which result in confirmed disclosure. Impacts of a breach, right? So there are a number of areas that aren't always considered. So one is financial loss. So GDPR, which is the European legislation around privacy, has imposed fines of 20 million euros or 4% of the annual revenue of the business, whichever is higher. So that can, as you can imagine, can be a significant amount of money that can be imposed upon organizations not being compliant. Then there's a share price impact. So, it's not always easy to quantify what the impact is, but certainly a number of large organizations that were impacted by breaches had significant impacts to their share price as well. Then you look at reputational damage. Customer confidence takes a massive hit when they find that you can't protect their data or you give the impression or the perception that their data is not in safe hands. So this can be a result in a loss of customers, both existing customers and prospective customers. So Ponemon Institute a couple of years back basically did a poll of a number of customers in the retail, financial and health care sectors. And they basically, 33% basically said they would not use a business or an entity that had suffered a breach. So it's significant. And obviously any one given customer that gets impacted, will then tell other customers or potential customers. And nowadays, breaches, sooner or later, they get found out and they get disclosed, even if there's not a regulatory requirement for it to be done so. At some point, it gets disclosed. So for the most part. So therefore, there's a serious impact on reputational damage. Then there's downtime. So normally, you know, when there's an outbreak, for example, especially when you're talking about ransomware, there's significant downtime that results, and that, you know, in order to contain the event and also eradicate, you know, the malware, for example, or whatever the cause of the breaches, that downtime can be significant and is business impacting, and therefore affects productivity and revenue. Then obviously the loss of sensitive information. That sensitive data can be used by hackers. It's either sold on, but also it can be used for criminal purposes, you know, over and above just selling it on. So identity theft, people's basically identity being taken over, their bank accounts being accessed, and money withdrawn. You know, there's significant impact to individuals and to businesses. And when you talk about ransomware, if you decide to pay the ransom, that can be a significant amount of money. If you take a look at Colonial Pipeline, which was a very recent ransomware attack, that resulted in a $5 million ransomware payout. And you find that, you know, 96% of ransomware that's paid for results in the data being restored. So unfortunately, rewarding the criminals has seems to be paying dividends to the criminals, but you know, many times organizations feel and compelled they don't have a choice because they don't have, for example, offline backups in place, right, to make sure that to make sure that they're protected or they can recover from a ransomware attack. And then the cost of response and recovery. You know, talk about response forensics, both internal resources, but in many cases you need external support as well. And then legal counsel, right? You may need to engage your legal counsel for advice and guidance with respect to whether you should disclose a certain breach and how you should go about doing that in a sensitive manner that complies with the law. And then you may be subject to legal action. Organizations or individuals may sue you for being negligent in how you handle their data. And finally, you know, if it targets an example by which, you know, in the past, it was just a CISO that would potentially be fired as a result of a major breach. Now, even the CEO can be fired, as in the case of Target. So there are a significant number of impacts of a breach. So in the Verizon DBI report that's just been released, the median average for where breaches resulted in financial loss, because not all breaches result in financial loss. The average was about $21,000, with 95% of incidents falling between $826 and $654,000. So there's a huge range there, but you know, the upper end, it can be very significant. So again, not to be underestimated, the financial impact there. Now, data breach cost versus security budget. What you'll find is many organizations will tell you from a security budget perspective, they don't have enough, right? It's in reality, it's never enough, but for the most part, you find that it literally isn't. So, you know, this basically, taken from a cybersecurity hub, demonstrates that, you know, you don't get, your budget is always finite, obviously, and you need to make do with what you've got. But then you get hit with a breach. And when a breach hits, we just talked about the various financial impacts that can contribute to the cost of a data breach. The cost is significant. Following which, the security budget, well, all of a sudden, for a short period of time, is significantly extended in order for you to take any actions that you need. So at this point, the CEO, the board will basically say, you need money to fix this so it doesn't happen again. Here's the money to do that. Again, that's for a finite period of time, after which, you know, you're back down to where you originally were prior to the breach. So make the most of understanding what, if there was a potential breach, God forbid, have a view of where you would like to spend that money so that you're ready for that eventuality. But, you know, more importantly, right-size your budget. So if you can explain the risks and the financial impact of a data breach to your organization, and based on that, help them allocate more budget to you from the get-go, it will put you in a far better position. So the problem, right? The magnitude of the problem, and this is taken from informationbeautiful.net. Now, this image basically just depicts the vast array of breaches that have taken place. And there's two key points that I want to emphasize here. One is nobody's immune, right? Whether you're Facebook and Microsoft, we've both got, you know, examples of organizations that have vast amounts of money and security resources at their disposal, but yet they were breached, right? Sony being another example. So it's not a case of, you know, you've got organization and resources that you don't get breached. You can still get breached. And then also then there's many cases where smaller organizations that are nowhere near the size and scale of the Facebooks and Microsofts world, but they are also targeted as well. And, you know, so don't think just because you're a small organization, you're not of interest. Criminals will go after you if they feel that you're an easy target and you're exposed to the potential threats. They'll go after you. And there are unfortunately enough criminals out there, and that is the primary motivation for a lot of the attacks. So 2 points again. So it doesn't matter the size of the organization, you can still get hit. Also, it doesn't matter how big your security organization is. You know, there's no silver bullet and there's no organization that is completely risk-free, right? All you can do is be as much diligent as you can, apply due care, make sure that you manage your threat landscape, take a risk-based approach, and prepare the best you can for the eventuality. So in the DBIR, there are a number of patterns that they basically categorize the various breaches. So the patterns here are listed here. For the vast majority, you can see that social engineering accounts for 36% of breaches, and of which, you know, for the most part, it's phishing, right? Phishing attacks, but not limited just to that, but phishing attacks for the most part. Then what's also interesting to know is 80% of the breaches are discovered by external parties. This could be law enforcement, could be other organizations that you know they believe that they're being attacked by your organization, whereas in fact, obviously, it's the malicious threat actor. Then you've got web attacks. You know, your websites are a primary target, and they're constantly being scanned using various resources, including free resources out there, both the good guys and the bad guys use, such as Shodan. And in many cases now, obviously, cloud is hosting many of the websites out there. So unfortunately, you know, it's not due to sophisticated attacks. You know, in many cases, it's just either stolen credentials or brute force. So, you know, this is where things like multi-factor authentication is crucial. Then you have system intrusion. This is a new pattern that's been introduced this year. 70%, over 70% of malware involved, of the system intrusion involved malware, and then 40% of the also involved hacking actions. So system intrusion is a significant problem. Malware, you know, including and ransomware are significant contributors to that. So doing things like pen testing, vulnerability assessments, making sure you're patching your systems, making sure you're using multi-factor authentication, making sure you're hardening your systems are all very important controls to help mitigate that. And then miscellaneous areas, you know, unfortunately, you know, you're talking about 52% of the errors of miscellaneous areas are due to misconfiguration. So, and in many cases, these are typically discovered by security researchers. And for the most part, personally identified information is most commonly exposed. Now, you know, this is where peer reviews are important, making sure you run your checks, you know, things like against CIS benchmarks, making sure you have file integrity monitoring to look for changes, obviously making sure you follow change control process. So these are a number of things that need to be done and more diligently in order to reduce the number of miscellaneous areas. And then privilege misuse. You know, obviously this is where you have or others that have higher privileges than the normal users, and as a result of which they're typically not monitored as much. And you can see 30% take months or years to discover of those breaches that took place as a result of privilege misuse. So PAM obviously is crucial to that, and then making sure that they're also, you know, not fully trusted, right? Job rotation is also important as well, making people take vacations. But over and above that, auditing is crucial as well. So what are the tactics used by the hackers, the attackers, the hacktivists, the different threat actors? You know, so interestingly enough, it's been determined of a count of 4,492 breaches, 85% of them were due to human element, right? So 85% of breaches with the total count of 4,492 were due to a human element. So this is where I put secure the humans. Very important that we train human beings. We do awareness sessions with them at a VIP level, end user level, IT level. This must be done on a regular basis. Both could be recorded sessions, in person, should be gamified to make it interested. You do, phishing exercises, so simulate phishing exercises as well. All of these will help make them aware. And but what's also important is that you lock things down, right? So ultimately, you can do as much awareness as you like, but somebody still will click that given email. So protection mechanisms need to be put in place. Using email security gateways, using secure web gateways, making sure that the users don't have admin access to their PCs, locking down what they can install on their PCs, and making sure that patches are up to date. All these actions need to be taken because you can't just rely solely on the human, because they will no doubt click that email or click that link. Anyway, offline backups are crucial because ransomware is significant again. And MFA and PAM obviously is a must, we talked about as well. And then look, for the most part, the motive behind the breaches are financial, right? For the vast majority, the criminals are out to make a big buck. There are other threat actors, but that's for the most part. So preparing for a breach, look, in the interest of time, I won't go through all the different levels. This is something I've defined, so it's don't take it for gospel. But basically, if you look at a mature level, and from an identification perspective, you would have threat modeling, you would do continuous monitoring, you do threat hunting, red teaming plus human and automated teaming, and then you wouldn't just have IOCs, you also have actionable targeted threat intelligence, and obviously asset management. Unfortunately, people still don't know what assets they have within their organizations, and they're not managing them effectively. So both the known assets and the unknown assets, both software and hardware. And then detection capabilities, not just having a SIM and a SOC operating 24/7, but also we're talking about SIM, IDS, SOAR, XDR, NDR, and EDR technologies, sandboxing and the like, customized use cases, using and leveraging machine learning, for example, within NDR solutions, but also in your SIM solutions. And then response, incident response plans, updating, maintained. It's crucial that you have that, tried and tested. Conducting breach simulations, so that tabletop exercises are undertaken, so that if a given breach scenario occurs, how would we respond to that? So that's crucial for identifying your readiness as well. Then having an SLA-driven incident response for highly skilled deferred resources is also is quite crucial, especially for larger organizations. And then having your forensics tools, your labs, well-defined playbooks, right, that define for each of the given scenarios, whether it's ransomware, malware, exfiltration, and the like. All of these need to be documented and applied. And then finally, recovery. So regular offline tested backups. The crucial is that you have offline backups. These backups need to be offline because otherwise, if they're online, they can also be subject to ransomware. And even if they're encrypted, the ransomware will encrypt the encrypted backups. So that doesn't help either. And also make sure that you have your standard bills ready and ready to go, so that if you need to recover from from a compromise, you can recover from those standard images. Here's the incident response plan. I won't go through this in detail, but basically it's important that all these components are accounted for in your plan. The plan is crucial. It needs to be maintained. Obviously, you need to have the mission and the scope of what your incident response plan is, what your strategy and goals are. Comms is crucial, along with establishing the key metrics, and then obviously a roadmap for maturing your capability over time. Now, life cycles wise, there are two main life cycles, incident response life cycles out there from a standards perspective. One is by NIST, which you can see at the top, and then you have the SANS. We'll focus on NIST. They're more or less the same, but just slightly differently, categorized differently. So from a preparation perspective, you have what's key is that you get exec sponsorship. You define your policy, plan and playbooks and KPIs and metrics. You have a war room that's established. So, when things go pear-shaped, you have a facility that we're virtual. It can be virtual, ideally, and maybe in this day and age, that's probably preferable. but a war room capability that where your team of the experts and the wider community of interested stakeholders can partake in getting you back up and running as soon as possible in terms of detection, analysis, and containment eradication. Obviously, in the preparation phase, you need to have your network diagram, systems, access, and the like. You need your jump bag and kit bag of packet sniffers, disk imaging, your jumpers, tweezers, and the like. You need a means of out-of-band comms. You can't rely on business comms because it could more than likely be compromised, like the MS Exchange recent vulnerability that took place. Your Exchange servers will be out, so therefore you need to use out-of-band comms, whether social media means, but ideally it'd be something encrypted. And then making sure from a controls perspective that you have protective controls in place, so that prevention is better than cure, as they say. And from a detective perspective, you also have your detective controls ready to detect any potential threats. Your logs need to be synchronized. You need to enable security context logs because they're not always enabled by default. Obviously, you need to ingest your logs in your SIM and then create associated use cases. And then enable features such as machine learning. And then response controls, right? You will never be able to respond quickly or rarely quickly enough to a lot of these attacks because, very quickly they can take over your entire environment. So deploying automated capabilities that are within SOAR, EDR, XDR solutions is crucial. And then breach simulation, like I said earlier, it's important to conduct tabletop exercises, make sure you have access standard your images, your gold images, and then conduct risk assessments, threat modeling, red teaming, PT and VA, that's crucial as well. And then finally, user awareness training, make sure that your folks are all briefed on a regular basis. Detection analysis. So, and we won't go through all of these, but it's important that you've got target threat intelligence in place so that you can take action based on potential threats to your organization. Obviously, IOCs as a given. You need to be able to review the logs, both ingesting the SIM, but also directly within the various controls that you have. Deploy the various detective controls you spoke about earlier. Make sure on an ongoing basis you're reviewing security notifications from the ISAC certs and so on. And then obviously this is where you would categorize incidents, prioritize and communicate them to the parties that need to take action, document the incidents, and especially chain of custody, especially potential legal implications. And if required, bring a third party to conduct compromise assessments. And then you would go about isolating the incidents, right? That could be isolating, the host, the subnet, the network. This could mean disconnecting the host from the network or the whole subnet itself. You can use your various tools to achieve that, using endpoint protection solution to remove any potential hardware. Disable any or delete any suspicious accounts. Get the folks to change their passwords, push out updates and patches, re-image where you need to, restore backups from known good offline backups, and then restrict traffic at the perimeter as well. And then finally, post-incident activity. A lot of times this is forgotten. People get back to their day job, as it were, but it's crucial that an after-action report is documented. We understand who, what, where, when, and how. We look at the threat actors, the vectors, the TTPs they use, and the assets that they went after. We conduct post-mortem meetings for the larger meetings, and then apply those lessons learned. Update your playbooks, update your plans, and also look at obtaining additional budget if you need to. Now, we talked about playbooks, so very quickly, a number of free playbooks at incidentresponse.com. There are other sites as well. Here's some of the playbooks that you should have in place. Obviously, ransomware over and above these should be there as well. Here's an example of what a playbook looks like. It's basically, I think of it, a run book or a high-level process flow. We're underpinned by standard operating procedures. So in each given phase of your incident lifecycle, you should have the basic inputs, decision points, and outputs. Stakeholders for incident response. So obviously, you've got the exec suite. Don't forget comms. You've got the media, account managers, and the customers. Are crucial that you need to inform them as well, especially to the potential breach as well. Then the regulators. It could be NCA in the Saudi Arabia or SAMA, central bank. There's ISAC certs and first that you may want to inform. Law enforcement, if you believe criminal activity is taking place. Obviously, if you have an MSSP, you'd inform them. External DFA teams, especially if you've got an incident response retainer. Your ISP, especially in cases if you have a DDoS attack. your legal counsel, right? So they can advise and guide you with respect to how the incident should be handled from a legal perspective. Advise your auditors, obviously your incident management will involve get-go, and HR, HR, especially if there are individual records that have been leaked. From a skills perspective, there are a number of skills that your CSET team should have. Obviously, some of the soft skills are crucial. Problem solving, critical thinking, and communications are absolutely vital. Threat hunting, an excellent understanding of the various security controls, red teaming capability, threat intelligence, forensics, and VAPT, and finding malware reverse engineering. So these are some of the skills. Now, you won't find it in a single individual. It's typically a broad spectrum of resources, and it's not necessarily in a well-defined, dedicated team. These could be spread and should be spread across the organization. So some of the IT team could be comprised of resources in IT, for example. Right, let's briefly talk about some of the models and frameworks. So you have the NIST cybersecurity framework. Again, it's a framework. And what's great about it is it just doesn't focus on identify and protect and detect. It also focuses on respond and recover, so the whole life cycle. It basically has a number of categories, as you can see there. And then for each of those categories, there are subcategories, and then informative references are the various standards that you can reference and leverage in order to underpin and enable the cybersecurity framework. Then you have the cyber kill chain. This is basically the means by which hackers, the bad actors, malicious actors, will look to compromise your given assets, all the way from reconnaissance through to weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, and action on objectives. So ultimately, their aim is to achieve point 7, which is action objectives, which could be exfiltration of data. So this is more about knowing how they typically approach compromising your assets. And therefore, once you know your enemy, you can start to defend and prepare for your enemy. So not all ICs are created equal. There's a David Bianca's pyramid of pain. He basically says that, when you identify by way of ICs, for example, hash values, IP addresses, domain names, and like, that's relatively easy and not as painful for the attacker because they can easily change them. So when you start targeting the TTPs at the top level, that becomes painful for them. You start blocking those and preventing and being able to detect and respond to TTPs. TTPs are something that the attackers find it harder to change because it's more behavioral. So that's what we should be looking to do is basically focus our energies on identifying the TTPs, and the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which we'll talk about now, is a useful tool for that. So the MITRE ATT&CK framework basically defines tactics, techniques, and procedures seen out there in the wild. So it's not hypothetical, they're real. You can see at the top the various tactics that are defined, such as initial access, persistence, privilege escalation, and then when each of these tactics, you have the various techniques used by the attackers, and when you drill them further, you'll see the procedures that they use, and then you can also see detection mechanisms and mitigation actions you can take. One of the great tools that leverage this capability is Red Canary's Atomic Red Team. It's a free resource that you can use to simulate these TTPs, and then MITRE also has Caldera, which is another tool that works, unfortunately, just on Windows at the moment, but effectively it does the same. So you can do automated TTP actions that emulates and simulates threat actors. In the interest of time, I won't go into detail diamond intrusion, model intrusion analysis. This was developed in 2006. It just basically says there are 4 main nodes to consider for any one given security event: the adversary, infrastructure, the victim, and the TTPs, and they have certain metadata associated with them. And then there's MITRE Shield again. This basically, it's not as well known, unfortunately, but it talks about how you can prepare your active defense tactics against the potential TTPs. So, how do you go about, for example, collecting the data, containing it, detecting the attack, disrupting it? There's different approaches to that. And then if you drill down, for example, here, I've just selected for detection. Hunting is one of the techniques here. And if you drill further, it gives you opportunities, use case, and procedures that you can use. And then the penultimate slide here, one of the great things about DBR is they tell you basically the various, you can see at the bottom on the left-hand side, the various patterns of breaches. And on the right-hand side, they've basically mapped the security controls that will mitigate these threats. So it will help you prioritize these security controls from CIS top 20 that will mitigate the vast majority of the breaches. And they've defined this by each of the various industries as well. So you can focus on what are the breaches in your industry, what are the key top 20 controls that I can deploy in order to mitigate or prevent or detect those attacks and take responsive actions as well. So there's a great resource as well from MITRE, from the CIS, I beg your pardon, that you can leverage. And finally, as a summary, like I said, executive sponsorship and policy is crucial. You need to have a well-practiced and defined IR plan. You need to have a strong team with the skill sets I mentioned. You need to understand and comply with regulatory and legal requirements. Conduct your maturity assessment, understand where you are, target where you want to get to, and put together a plan of action to get there. To look at some of the frameworks that, I think it's good for you to adopt, like the NIST cybersecurity framework. Look at adopting zero trust architecture and prioritizing security controls based on your risks to your assets. Have well-defined playbooks, right? Aligned with SANS or NIST, doesn't matter. Make sure they're documented, make sure they're maintained, make sure you do tabletop exercises by way of breach simulations. Have a robust communications plan that doesn't rely on your standard comms. Have tried and tested DRP and BCM plan. Finally, practice regularly so that when the inevitable happens, you will be as ready as you possibly can. Finally, here are some resources that you may find useful. Many thanks.